Have you noticed that some words in different languages sound almost the same? Like in English, we say three. In Spanish, they say tres. In the ancient Indian language called Sanskrit, they say three. That is pretty weird. Three different languages spoken in three very different parts of the world, and yet the word for the number three sounds almost identical in all of them. Is that just a coincidence? Well, today we are going to find out, and the answer may completely change the way you think about words, languages. This is the story of William Jones, a man who lived over 200 years ago, and his discovery that many of the world's languages are actually part of the same family. Language experts today call this language Proto-Indo-European. Let's start at the very beginning. William Jones was born in London, England in 1746. By the time he grew up and studied at Oxford University, he could already speak and read languages like Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, Persian, and more. Some records say William Jones could use 28 different languages. Because of his incredible skill with languages, especially Asia and the Middle East languages, people started calling him an Orientalist. That was the word they used back then for someone who studied the cultures, history, and languages of Asia. Today, we might call him a linguist, which is a fancy word for someone who studies languages. William Jones was also a lawyer. He worked hard, built a great reputation, and made important friends. One of those friends was Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States. So, what happened next? How did a London-born lawyer who loved languages end up making one of the biggest discoveries in the history of language? The answer is, he went to India. In 1783, something big happened. A judge position opened up at the Supreme Court in Calcutta, India, which was then under British control. The governor of Bengal at the time, a man named Warren Hastings, had a special plan. He wanted British officials in India to actually learn and understand Indian culture, instead of just bossing people around without knowing anything about them. William Jones, with his knowledge of Asian, was the perfect person for the job. He was offered the position, and in the same year he was also given the title of Sir, so from that moment on he was known as Sir William Jones. In 1784, after arriving in India, his main job as a judge was to understand Hindu law, which was written in an ancient language called Sanskrit. It is one of the oldest languages ever written down, and it was used to write ancient Indian religious texts, laws. Before Jones learned Sanskrit, British judges had a big problem. They could not read the law books themselves. They had to depend on Indian scholars, called Pandits, to translate the Sanskrit laws into Persian, and then another person would translate from Persian into English. So the law went through 3 different languages before it reached the British judge. 3 translations. You can imagine how many mistakes and mix-ups could happen along the way. Jones was deeply uncomfortable with this. He thought the translations might not be accurate. He worried that somewhere along the way, the real meaning of the law was getting lost, or even changed on purpose because of bias, bribery, or local influence. So he made a bold decision. He would learn Sanskrit himself. This was not a small or easy thing to do. Sanskrit is a very complex and ancient language. But William Jones was not the kind of person to give up. He studied hard, found teachers, and began reading the ancient texts on his own. And that is when something incredible happened. Something that would change the study of language forever. As Jones studied Sanskrit more and more, he started to notice something really strange. Sanskrit, this super old language from ancient India, looked and sounded a lot like Greek and Latin. For example, the Sanskrit word for father is pitar. The Latin word for father is pater. The Greek word for father is pater. Look at those 3 words. They all start with P and end with a similar sound. Even though these languages come from completely different parts of the world, India, Rome, and ancient Greece, their word for father is almost exactly the same. Let's look at another example. English, mother, Latin, mater, Sanskrit, matar, Greek, mater. Again, nearly identical, all starting with the same M sound, all ending in a similar way. Or how about numbers? English, 3, Latin, trace, Sanskrit, tree, Greek, trace. One more. English, new, Latin, novus, Sanskrit, navas, Greek, naos. Jones looked at these patterns and thought, this is too similar to be a coincidence. When two people who live near each other use similar words, that makes sense. They could have borrowed words from each other through trade, travel, or war. That happens all the time in history. It's called language borrowing. But India and Europe? In the ancient world, those places were incredibly far apart. Regular people in ancient Europe and ancient India almost never met each other. So how could their languages be so similar in the most basic and important words, like mother, father, numbers, body parts? Language borrowing could not explain this. There had to be a different answer. Jones thought about it, studied more, compared more words and grammar patterns, and slowly came to a stunning conclusion. On February the 2nd, 1786, Sir William Jones stood up to give a speech at the Asiatic Society in Calcutta. In that speech, Jones said something that nobody had ever said before, at least not in such a clear and powerful way. He said, and I am going to put it in simple words for us, Sanskrit is a beautifully made language, even more perfect in some ways than Greek, and richer than Latin. But here's the most important thing. Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin are so similar in their verb forms and grammar that no scholar who studies all three could possibly believe the similarity is an accident. They must have all come from one common source, a single parent language that existed a long time ago, and which has probably disappeared. Basically, Jones was saying that Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, and probably many other languages too, were not just random languages that happened to look alike. They were brothers and sisters. They all came from the same parent. Like children in a family who look similar because they share the same mum and dad, these languages looked similar because they all grew out of one original ancient language. That ancient parent language, the one Jones said had probably disappeared, is what we now call Proto-Indo-European. It was the moment that comparative linguistics, the science of comparing languages to understand where they came from, was truly born. Proto-Indo-European is the original ancestor language that gave birth to many different languages across Europe and Asia. We're talking about English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, German, Dutch, Russian, Persian, Hindi, Bengali, Greek, and many more. For example, the Proto-Indo-European word for water is believed to have been something like wed. The little star before a word means it's a constructed, guessed word, not one we found written anywhere. From that one Proto-Indo-European root, it became water in Old English, then water in Modern English. It became hydor in Greek, which is why English uses hydro in words like hydrant and hydrogen. It became voda in Slavic languages, and that's where the word vodka comes from. Yes, vodka literally means little water in Russian. Water, hydro, vodka, three completely different-looking English words all coming from the same Proto-Indo-European root. Once you know this, language starts to feel like the most exciting puzzle in the world. According to historians, the people who spoke Proto-Indo-European lived on the grasslands, called steppes, of what is now southern Ukraine and Russia. This was a wide, flat, open area, perfect for a specific lifestyle. These people were nomads, meaning they did not stay in one place. They moved around with their animals, looking for grass and water. And here is the key. They were some of the first people in the world to tame horses. Think about what that means. A horse is not just a pet. In the ancient world, a horse was like having a car, a truck, all in one. A person on a horse could travel much faster and much farther than someone on foot. With horses and with wheels, which these people also developed early, they had incredible mobility. So what happened? Over hundreds and hundreds of years, small groups of these people began to spread out in all directions, kind of like when you drop a stone into a pond and the ripples go out in circles. Some groups went west and north into Europe. Over thousands of years, their language slowly changed and became the ancestors of German, English, French, Spanish, Italian, Greek, and many others. Other groups went east and south, through Central Asia and into Iran and India. Their language slowly changed and became Persian and Sanskrit, and from Sanskrit grew Hindi, Bengali, Urdu, and many of the languages of South Asia. Now, here's something really interesting. When languages change over thousands of years, you might think the changes are random, like sounds just change however they feel like it. But actually, that's not true at all. Language changes follow rules. A man named Jacob Grimm, yes, the same Jacob Grimm who collected fairy tales with his brother, was also a brilliant language scientist. And in the early 1800s, he discovered something amazing. When the Proto-Indo-European language transformed into the Germanic languages, like English and German, the consonant sounds changed in a very regular and predictable pattern. This discovery is called Grimm's law. Here's a simple example of Grimm's law in action. In Latin, which kept closer to Proto-Indo-European, the word for foot is pes, starting with a P sound. In English, a Germanic language, the word is foot, starting with an F sound. In Latin, fish is piscis, starting with P. In English, fish starts with F. See the pattern? The P sound in Latin-like languages often became an F sound in English. This did not happen randomly. It happened to every single word that had that sound. It was a rule that the whole language followed. And this also showed that even though English and Latin look very different on the surface, they are deeply connected underneath. This is why knowing a bit about Proto-Indo-European and language history helps English learners so much. Once you understand why words change, the language stops feeling random and starts feeling like it makes perfect sense. Okay, so we've learned a lot of history and science today, but you might be wondering, why does any of this matter for me right now in my everyday life? Great question. Here's why. Understanding that English is part of this giant language family changes how you learn and remember vocabulary. Instead of just memorizing words, you can start to see the patterns underneath. For example, do you know the word nocturnal, meaning active at night? It comes from the Latin word nox, meaning night, and that Latin word came from a Proto-Indo-European root. We can call it PIE root, meaning darkness or night. The English word night itself also comes from that same Proto-Indo-European root. Different path, same ancient origin. So night and nocturnal are like cousins from the same ancient family. Or think about the word dental, relating to teeth. It comes from Latin dens, meaning tooth. The English word tooth also comes from the same PIE root. So tooth and dental are connected. Just one took the Germanic path and the other took the Latin path. Once you start seeing these connections, learning new vocabulary becomes much easier and much more fun. It stops feeling like random memorization and starts feeling like discovering a family tree. And that's exactly what William Jones started, all the way back in 1786.